Good night. Good morning. It's extremely exciting for me to be here with you. Also like to say a big hello to those who are watching on live broadcast. Great to see a room full of leaders. I'm always honored to address a room full of leaders, and today is absolutely no exception. So we just heard how Warby Parker is getting ready for the future, and that's the theme of our discussion today. Is how do we get ready for the future? And I would like to introduce you to a methodology called the 4 lenses of innovation. So it'd be very easy for me to stand up here and say, we all have to innovate. We all have to innovate. But how? How do we innovate? How do we get ready for the future? And that is the theme of the keynote speech this morning. So I'm very excited to be back here in Istanbul. I have been here many, many times over the last few years. Of course, yes, we're very saddened by what happened on Saturday evening. I was almost in Taksim with my wife on Saturday evening. We had planned to go, and then we decided we were too tired, so let's stay in the hotel. We were fortunate. Many people were not so fortunate. So our hearts truly are with those that were somehow affected by that whole tragedy, friends, family, colleagues, and so on. But we want to be positive, and we want to look forward, as we said, to the future, 2017 and beyond. I get to travel a lot around the world. I've been to 62 countries in about the last 5 or 6 years alone. And sometimes well, obviously multiple times in many countries. And sometimes I have a really crazy week. I want to tell you about 1 week earlier this year. This has been a typical year for me, but this 1 week I was in Los Angeles on Sunday. Monday afternoon, I did a whole afternoon session in Hong Kong for an energy company. On Tuesday morning, I was already in Johannesburg in South Africa to work with a real estate company. On Wednesday of the same week, I was already in Brazil in a place called Porto Alegre at a big innovation conference. On Thursday, I was in Amsterdam to talk over there at a big event. And on Friday, I was in Abu Dhabi at an oil and gas event. So this is 1 week. This is 7 days. So sometimes my life is completely crazy. This last 5 weeks, I think it is, I spent 1 week with Tesla in Fremont, in California. I then went to China for a 4-city speaking tour for 2 weeks. So starting in Beijing and moving on to Xi'an, where you have the terracotta soldiers, and then to Shanghai, which is the city of the future, and then to Xiamen on the coast near to Taiwan. And all of that was in cooperation with Dell Technologies. And basically all we talked about was digital transformation, which is a huge issue, not just for Warby Parker or anybody here in Turkey, but certainly for the Chinese. From there I went on to Brussels, where I spent a day with a big global fertilizer company called Yara. And then on to Holland, where I had a 2-day event, a leadership event around innovation with one of the world, in fact, the world's largest manufacturer of wheels for cars. In fact, they have a plant right here in Izmir, which is an important part of their global footprint. And then of course, we're here right now in beautiful Istanbul. So again, my life looks a little bit like this. Crazy, 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 running around. But one thing that's enabled me to do is to interact with well over 100,000 business leaders from all kinds of different companies, hundreds of companies, many of them in the Fortune 500, some of them mid-sized companies, but also well over 50 different industries. So as you can hear, one day I'm with a technology company, the next day I'm with a wheel manufacturer, and the next day it's with a pharmaceutical company, or a fertilizer company, or a bank. So it's basically, I feel sometimes like a bumblebee I'm not sure what that is in Turkish. A little bee that goes from flower to flower, and I can cross-pollinate and pick up ideas from here and bring them to there, and it's actually a wonderful thing. But one thing that I've realized in talking to all these companies and all these executives around the world is that innovation has become undoubtedly the number one strategic priority. Not just in business, but also in government. How do we grow an economy? How do we continue to increase standard of living? And the only way we do that is through innovation. One region that really gets that is China, from the top down. So government-led, government-funded innovation program. They talk about it as Internet Plus. Look it up on Wikipedia, Internet Plus. So they say Internet plus government, Internet plus banking, Internet plus manufacturing, Internet plus agriculture, and so on. So it's not just the Internet in terms of the web, but the Internet of things. How do we bring digital transformation to everything we do? You know, the former president of China made this statement, which was very important several years ago, where he said, we need to shift as a nation in China from made in China to created in China. So if you think about Turkey, Turkey has had an incredibly important role in terms of manufacturing for Europe, but also other parts of the world. And so made in Turkey is now a term that means quality. So how do we, as China is doing, how do we make the shift from made in Turkey to innovated in Turkey, as they're now doing in China, innovated in China? The current president of China, Mr. Xi Jinping, has stated that for China there are three major strategic priorities. Three. And those three priorities are innovation, innovation, and innovation. That's how important innovation is to the Chinese government and the Chinese economy. And what we're seeing over there is all these efforts to encourage entrepreneurship, to encourage homegrown innovation. Not innovation from Silicon Valley that we copy and we bring in, but innovation from within the country itself. So you see this model where we bring together research groups and startups together with investors for investment capital funding, and then bringing those ideas into companies to connect and develop them for the future. I gave a speech back in May in Beijing at a big event called Demo China. And I arrived at 4:30 a.m. in the morning, and by 11 o'clock I was on a stage like this, but there were 2,500 people in the audience. And those 2,500 people were all startups. They were all entrepreneurs. And this event is so popular that they hold it now twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall, in the autumn. So there's this tremendous explosion of entrepreneurship in China. No wonder we see all these fabulous new innovative products and services and also business models like Tencent, or WeChat, which is now used as a payment system. All these things coming out of China. Now, of course, we see a similar development here in Turkey, which, again, for me is so extremely exciting. It's how do we shift to the next level? How do we shift to being an innovation economy? And we see, of course, the wonderful movement today in terms of entrepreneurship, startups. There's a wonderful startup community, as you know, right here in Turkey. Lots of young people with big ideas, big dreams. And I love that. Think big, start small. And of course, as a bank, you're interested in those and encouraging those startups that are coming with new ideas that may one day become absorbed into what you do to create value for your customers. The event right here in Istanbul, Startup Istanbul, the leading event here for startups in Eurasia. As a great example, just like that conference in China, the Demo China, you have your own wonderful startup community. So we're seeing great things everywhere. But we have to ask ourselves, why is innovation so important? Why does everyone talk about innovation? So much that sometimes we roll our eyes and go, oh no, not innovation again. Why is it so important? Well, I think there are two main reasons for the importance of innovation. The first has to do with the question that every single company on earth is asking itself. And that question is, how do we grow the business? Every company wants to grow. How many of you here in this room today work for a company that has ambitious growth plans? Can I see a show of hands? How many of you work for a company that has ambitious growth plans? How many of you work for a company that wants to double its revenues in the next 5 years? Can I see a show of hands? How many of you want to double revenues in the next 3 years? So let me ask you, how old is your company? How many years have you been in business? 10 years. So it's taken you 10 years to get to where you are, and in 3 years you want to double. It's exponential. Who else is going to double revenues in 3 years? Can I see a show of any more hands? Double revenues in 3 years? There was some more? Okay, no, you don't want me to ask anymore because I know you. Okay, 5 years. Well, let's go back to the 5 years. Who's going to double revenues in 5 years? How old is your company? 18 years. Again, 18 years to get to where you are, and in 5, you want to double. So we're talking about exponential growth in a way. How do you drive that level of growth? Where is the growth going to come from? Is it going to come from downsizing the company? Cost cutting? Is it going to come from Lean Six Sigma? Is it going to come from quality or customer service or mergers and acquisitions? Where's the growth going to come from? What we're finding out that the only way for us to drive growth and wealth creation over the longer term, and I literally mean the only way, is to innovate. That growth is not going to come from anywhere else. You don't double revenues through quality and service and those things, which are very necessary. They're like the brushing your teeth of doing business. You know, they're necessary, they keep you healthy, but they're not going to add huge, dramatic growth. The only way you get that growth is through innovation. So if we look at some of the companies today that are creating all the new wealth in the world, a lot of new wealth, where is that growth coming from? Is it coming from Lean Six Sigma and quality and service and downsizing and cost cutting? What are these companies all known for in one word? What's the word? Innovation, isn't it? Am I making this up or is this true? It's innovation. Look at those companies at the top 4. They are worth together now, in terms of their market capitalization, market value, $2 trillion. Just those 4 at the top. If I take, for example, Tesla, Uber, Airbnb, Netflix, Snapchat, we're talking $200 billion of value. All of that value has come from innovation. All of it. Let's take this wonderful company, Tesla. Do you have Tesla in Turkey? You don't? Wait till you do. You're going to love Tesla. You're not going to like it, you're going to love Tesla. Tesla now, I mean, if you look at the articles in Forbes magazine the last few years, the world's most innovative companies, right at the top there is Tesla Motors. Do you notice that you don't see Apple anymore in the top 10? That's an interesting development. We'll come to that in a moment. That's 2015. This is 2016, this year. Again, Tesla Motors, right at the very top. Most innovative company in the world, Tesla. Tesla now has a market capitalization of around $30 billion. So sometimes it's 33, sometimes it's 29, 31, but around $30 billion. That's a huge amount of money. If I had $30 billion here on the stage, can you imagine how much money that is? Everybody would be running to the front to grab some of it, I'm sure. But 30 billion. Let's compare Tesla to General Motors and Ford. So this is market value, right? So here's a company, Tesla, is worth 30 billion. So that's over half the value of General Motors or Ford. Yet how old is Tesla? Look how many years in business these companies have. So Tesla is only 13 years in business. It's a baby. It's a little baby company. General Motors has been around for 108 years and Ford for 113 years. But look at the share price. Here's Tesla, right? $190 a share. You can get General Motors shares for $35. You can pick up Ford for $12. It's like pocket money. You want some Ford shares? It's worth nothing. What is it that has made this difference between Tesla and General Motors and little tiny Ford? What is it that's made the difference? In one word. Right? Innovation. Look at this. You have to ask yourself, why is Tesla worth so much money? I want to answer the question with another question, right? Why is Tesla located in Silicon Valley? When Tesla started the company, why didn't they locate their headquarters and their manufacturing in Detroit or in Stuttgart in Germany or in Munich or in Turkey? Why did they choose Silicon Valley? What do you think the answer is? Why? They wanted to be right next to innovation. And what kind of innovation? Software innovation. Do you know something? Tesla is not an engineering-driven company. If you don't believe me, go and see the Tesla manufacturing plant. I go there 5 times a year. I take a group of people, innovation directors from all kinds of companies, from Shell and Bayer and Airbus and Levi's and whatever, and I take them to see Tesla. And you know what? They're all disappointed with the manufacturing. Yeah, they are, because it's not an engineering company. It's a software-driven company. And so here's the point. If you want a really great engineered car, buy a Mercedes. Buy a BMW. But I'll tell you this. Your Mercedes is not going to drive itself out of your garage in the morning, 5 minutes before you need to get to work, and park itself in front of your house. And when you come out, your favorite radio station is playing. The temperature in the car is the perfect temperature that you love. Your seat is in exactly the right position. And overnight, your car has had a software update. So it now has new capabilities that it didn't have yesterday. I know people that actually sit in the garage at night and wait for the software update to see what... It's true. They'd rather watch the software update than watch television or go to Facebook. They want to know what new features they're going to get in the car. Tesla is the only car that gets better over time. Every other car gets worse. You buy the car and 3 years later you need the new one because it's a better car. Tesla is better and better and better over time. You just download the latest features. So it's a software-driven company. It's an innovation-driven company. That's why Tesla has that huge valuation. Because growth is fueled by innovation. It is not going to come from anywhere else, ultimately. Where there's no innovation, on the long term, there's no growth. We just heard about some of the digital innovations at Yappy Credit. If you stopped innovating today, where would you be in 5 years? You wouldn't grow. Because when you stop innovating, you stop growing. Here's Tim Cook. Tim Cook, of course, inherited the most valuable company on planet Earth. How much was Apple worth in 1997 when Steve Jobs came back? Anybody know what was the total stock market value of Apple in 1997? How much? Guess? 8, 9, 10 million, did you say? Okay. It was 2 billion, okay? Again, still a lot of money. If I had 2 billion here, you'd still think it's a lot of money. But in corporate terms, 2 billion is not that much. Steve Jobs took Apple from being worth 2 billion to being worth 656 billion, the most valuable company in the history of the world. And how did they do that? Through quality, service, cost cutting? Again, the answer is one word: innovation, right? So he inherited the most valuable company in the world. No wonder he's laughing. But what have we seen this year? In the spring, Apple posted its first quarterly loss in 13 years. Just about a month ago, or end of October, Apple has reported its first fall in annual sales and profits since 2001, as iPhone sales decline. So Apple is not looking so happy anymore. No wonder Tim Cook is praying, because they now think about Apple as the new Nokia or the new BlackBerry. It's amazing. What we see at Apple today is not radical innovation. What we see is incremental improvement, right? What has Apple given us since Steve Jobs passed away? A slightly bigger iPhone, a slightly smaller iPad, a slightly better operating system, and a watch. And they're talking about making a car. I told Apple 5 or 6 years ago, you should buy Tesla. Buy it now, and then you'll have the Apple car. That would have been amazing. But they didn't want to do it. They wanted to focus on the core business and just improve what they're currently doing. And that's what's wrong with Apple today. They're no longer innovating in radical ways. The big threat to Apple is not really Samsung. You might think it's Samsung. It was Samsung, but then Samsung introduced a product that kind of sabotaged their success story, right? Anybody got the Samsung Galaxy Note 7? How many of you got a Galaxy Note 7? Well, I'm quite relieved to know that nobody in the room has a Galaxy Note. Because, of course, this phone has a special feature that is not very popular with people. You know, you wouldn't really... This is the only phone that they tell you to take off the plane. I mean, if you carry this thing on the plane, they're going to take you off the plane. But Samsung, luckily, they're working in a field of wearable computing. So they've decided now that when you buy the Galaxy Note 7, they're going to give you a special Samsung outfit, you know, to wear with the phone, so that you can use it safely. So Apple's big threat is not coming from Samsung. Apple's threat is coming from these Chinese smartphones. That's where all the sales are falling. And it's companies like Xiaomi. Have anybody heard of Xiaomi? How many of you know Xiaomi? Not everyone. Xiaomi went from nothing in 2010 to the #1 smartphone company in China in 4 years. Now they're #3. That's how quickly things change. And we have Huawei, Vivo, Oppo, and this company, LeTV, which is part of a bigger company called LeEco, which is kind of like the Apple of China. And they're already launching their own car. I'll show you that in a moment. So the real threat comes from lower-priced Chinese smartphones. So it's disruption in that industry. And that is the big threat today. So whatever industry you're in, most companies are afraid of some form of disruption. That's certainly true of the clients that I've been working with. In an MIT study, a survey, they estimated that 32% of the company's revenues were under threat from disruption. So 1/3 of the revenues. When I was in China, Dell EMC presented this survey that they had carried out with 4,000 respondents in all kinds of industries around the world, including financial services. And here's some of the results. They found that 53% of those respondents have experienced significant disruption in their own industry since 2013. So that's in the last 2 years. Even more worrying, 47% of respondents believe that their industries will be unrecognizable in 3 years. Unrecognizable. And in automotive, that was 50%. Another survey from the Global Center for Digital Business Transformation, they found that senior business executives said that nearly half of the top-ranked companies in their industries will be gone by 2020. So either unrecognizable industries or half of the top players gone. That's the world we're in. So what exactly is disruption? I define disruption as the change that occurs when new technologies and business models affect the value proposition of existing goods and services. This dramatic change. And a lot of that change today comes from startups, which is good news and bad news. It's good news if you're encouraging startups around your own business. Companies like General Electric, IBM, BMW, they create incubators for startups so you can become part of what we do. But if you don't do that, it could be very bad news. Because disruptive startups today very easily get into an industry. The barriers of entry are diminishing. And also we have crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, outsourcing, and also cloud computing solutions which enable startups to scale up very rapidly. And there are a number of key technologies today that these startups are using to disrupt industries, whether it's mobile, social, cloud computing, data, big data analytics, artificial intelligence, e-commerce, robotics, particularly the Internet of Things, that's another big thing in China, synthetic biology, 3D printing, additive manufacturing, virtual reality, and also unmanned aerial vehicles or drones. And what's interesting is you could take all of those trends and you could put them all together. They're all converging with one another. Just look at the automotive industry. There are 4 trends that have changed the whole automotive industry in just the last 5 years. I would argue that the automotive industry didn't change fundamentally for 100 years until these things came along, right? Connected mobility, all-electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles. I mean, honestly, how many of us honestly expected to see self-driving cars in our own lifetime? Did anybody honestly expect to see that? None of us. Yet within 5 years it becomes commonplace. And then ride sharing. Think about Uber and Lyft and Sidecar, or in China they have their own version called Didi. How many of us really expected that to completely disrupt the taxi industry around the world? So these 4 trends are changing everything. And what's interesting is that it's the startups that are taking most advantage of these things. It's not the big established players. It is the Teslas, Echo, I told you they've already produced their own concept car, Faraday Future. In China we have Tencent, which now has created a company called Future Mobility. They're already over in Silicon Valley. And Next EV, Next Electric Vehicle, same thing from China. So now there's 86 car brands already in China. And you see, if you go to the big auto shows in China, you see these amazing cars, amazing brands. They say a new day, a new car brand in China, every day. In fact, it's estimated that by 2020, 70% of electric cars in China will be built by Chinese companies. It won't be the Teslas, it'll be the Chinese companies. And so we have this amazing confluence, this convergence of business and technology forces today. And all of that is really driven by innovation, all of it. And that's why traditional business models don't last anywhere near as long as they used to. Look at the sell-by date on the egg. Business models get broken today much faster than ever before in business history. Just look at some of the industries up on this slide. Let's take the first one. Look at the music industry. Nobody buys CDs anymore. Everybody listens to their music either from iTunes or YouTube. YouTube is a very big music media channel. Spotify. These things have changed the music industry. Then we look at movies and television. All of that's now been changed by streaming media, right? YouTube, Amazon Prime, Netflix, those things. Advertising has now basically shifted over irreversibly to mobile advertising. Financial services, here we are in the room. We think about digital banking, the digital wallet. I mean, if I ask you, how many of you, if you think about it, what would you rather lose today? Your cell phone or your wallet? What would you rather lose? Well, I mean, it's a trick question, really, because it's the same thing, right? You have a digital wallet. If you think about travel, now it's all replaced by online travel agencies, by Airbnb. How many of you have tried Airbnb? Isn't it fantastic? What a wonderful experience that is. Telecommunications. How do you compete with free? If you're a telecom company, how do you compete with free calls, free video conferences on Skype and FaceTime and so on? The automobile industry, the taxi industry, again, we talk about electric cars, connected mobility, ride sharing, energy. We move away from carbon and fossil fuels towards sustainable energy. And of course, we all know what this thing is over here. This is the Tesla battery, the storage battery on the wall. How many of you have seen that thing? Powerwall. So those of you who don't, I'll explain that a little later. Then we think about retail. Everything's shifting now to e-commerce in China more than anywhere in the world. Media is completely changing. And then, of course, if you think about manufacturing and logistics, the impact of the Internet of Things, the industrial internet, Industry 4.0, the factory of the future, whatever you want to call it. And then we have 3D printing, so additive manufacturing or delivery, last mile delivery via drones. All this stuff's changing. And these are just some business models. So business models today, I like to say, they're up for grabs. Anybody can reinvent anyone else's industry. So the question you have to ask is, what about your business model? Is your business model under threat from some disruptive competitor? Or are you the disruptor that is about to disrupt the rest of your industry and all of your competition? What we don't want is to put our head in the sand and pretend that nothing's changing. And everything will continue the same way forever. It's the most dangerous thing that we can do in a world where we have a hyper-acceleration of change. Change is happening faster today than ever before in the history of the world. We have hyper-competition. We're now competing with companies we never expected to compete with. You know, I've worked with Barclays Bank over in Kenya. And the biggest competitor of Barclays Bank is not another bank. It's a mobile phone service provider called Safaricom with M-Pesa. M-Pesa is mobile money. So the bank now is competing with a mobile phone service provider. That's hyper-competition. M-Pesa now has 18 million users just sending money. You know what M-Pesa is? It's basically money transactions via SMS. Again, something that you're now already doing in Turkey. But today you find yourself competing with companies you never expected to be competing with. We also have a rapid commoditization of products and services and also capabilities. Anything you do, someone else can do today. And they can maybe do it faster, maybe do it cheaper in India or China or whatever. And finally, we have this thing we call customer primacy. It means that today, in a world where there are many choices, many companies are competing for the same customer's money, in that world, I, as a customer, will give my money to whoever does business in the way that suits me the best. Whether it's the right service package, the right design, whatever it is that means value to me. So it used to be in the old days that you could give the customer anything you wanted. And the customer had to swallow it because the customer didn't have any choice. But now the customer has many choices. So it's very easy for customers to shift away from one business to another, especially when we think about digitally connected customers. Because now that we have these digital connections, our customer expectations are higher, whether it in business to business or in B2C, business to consumer. We now have these raised expectations as customers. So I would argue that we're not just in a race for growth today, doubling revenues in 3 years or 5 years. The real race is the race for renewal. It's the race to change as fast as the world is changing around you. It's the race to find new sources of profit before the old sources of profit disappear. And it's the race to reinvent your business model and your strategy before those things become obsolete. That's the race we're in. We're finding out that the only way for us to truly sustain success over the longer term is to continually reinvent that success, right? From year to year, month to month, week to week, day to day, almost hour to hour, reinvention, reinvention. And the only way we're going to do that is through innovation, right? Reinvention won't come from anywhere else. So whether we look at this from the point of view of growth, or we look at it from the point of view of continuous strategic renewal at the level of the business model, the only option we have is to innovate. That's why in 2004, on the 10th of October, when Business Week published their 75th anniversary issue, their front cover story was the innovation economy. Basically signaling the start of a new kind of economy, a value-based economy, a customer-centric economy, a creative economy. And one of the interesting lines in that particular issue was this. They said CEOs and the corporations they run can no longer generate value by competing solely on cost and quality. So they are turning to innovation as their only hope for driving growth and driving renewal. So all of this begs a very important question, right? Where does innovation actually come from? I said at the beginning, I'm not just going to tell you about how important innovation is. I'm going to share with you a methodology for actually innovating, for making innovation simple for every single person in your company. When I was working on my latest book, which is called The 4 Lenses of Innovation, I did a lot of research into hundreds and hundreds of cases of successful business innovation over many years. Even back in history, all the way back to the Renaissance period, or right back to the Sumerians. Really, like, how did we invent the wheel? How did we invent cuneiform writing? What I was looking for was to try to understand the way the mind of the innovator works. How did Steve Jobs think? How does Jeff Bezos think? Elon Musk of Tesla. How do they think? And then I went back and looked at people like Einstein and Edison and Henry Ford. Or in the Renaissance period, it might be Gutenberg, or Galileo, or Leonardo da Vinci. So how did these guys think? How did they come up with their great discoveries? Because if we can discover some common thinking patterns, then maybe we can re-engineer those thinking patterns. Maybe we can teach everyone to think like Steve Jobs or to think like Jeff Bezos. And I discovered that there were 4 common thinking patterns of innovators that all of us can emulate, all of us can learn and copy and re-engineer, reverse engineer. What I found was that innovators do not come to their big ideas just by staring out of the window, waiting for a light bulb to go off above their head, like Eureka. What they do is they look at the world from certain perspectives. They have certain ways of looking at the world. And by using those perspectives, or those lenses, they're able to see opportunities that the rest of us can't see. The rest of us are blind because we're not using the lenses. So if we use those lenses, we can see opportunities that are out there hidden in plain sight. I mean, they're out there by definition because someone discovers them. So how do we see them? What are these lenses? Well, the first lens of innovation is called challenging orthodoxy. Challenging conventional wisdom. Being a contrarian, a rebel, right? Being someone who thinks different. Remember the Apple slogan? Think different. So challenge conventional wisdom, challenge assumptions, challenge the status quo. That's the first lens of innovation. You look at something and you go, what if we did things differently? The second lens is called harnessing trends. So it's understanding all of the many changes that we see taking place so fast around us. Not just technology changes, demographic changes, regulatory changes, changes in geopolitics, changes, all kinds of changes. What are the trends? And how do we harness the power of change and bring it into our business model to create new value? So your digital tools at Yapi Credit are an example of using a technology trend and bringing that into the business model. The third lens of innovation is called leveraging resources. That means that every single company in this room has a set of resources, not just money and time and people, but core competencies, unique skills, and also strategic assets, things that you own. It could be data, for example, is a very underutilized asset today. But the question is, how do we take our skills and our assets and stretch them into new growth opportunities? Or how do we combine our resources with other people's competencies, other people's assets, through collaboration, through partnership, joint venture, or acquisition? How do we connect the dots out in the world? And the fourth lens of innovation is called understanding needs. Understanding the unmet, unaddressed needs of customers. It's about thinking from the customer backward instead of from the company forward, right? Think about the customer, think about the needs, and then design solutions from the customer backward. These are the four lenses of innovation. And it's become a very powerful, systematic tool for innovating inside any company on the planet. So what you do is you create teams, and those teams systematically use the lenses. They challenge orthodoxies. They harness the trends. They leverage resources in new ways. They look at customer needs and figure out how we can meet them. So let's look at those four lenses in a little bit more detail. Challenging orthodoxies. How many of you know somebody inside your company? Don't point to anybody in the room. Somebody who looks at the world like there's only one way of doing things in this business. Well, that way of doing things might not be wrong, but it's not the only way of doing things. And if you look at the world like this, you will be blind to anything that's there or there outside of your narrow field of vision. So we want to challenge the conventional ways of doing things. For example, why are watermelons round? Why aren't watermelons square? So if you go to Japan today, you'll find that one of the popular fashion foods is the square watermelon. And what's interesting is that those farmers can charge you a premium. They charge you more money for a square watermelon than a round one. Well, my question is, how do you grow a square watermelon? Do you have to go and change the DNA of the watermelon, the genetic code? How do you do it? How do you grow a square watermelon? Put it in a box. And now it sounds so simple to all of you, but how many of you would have thought about growing it in a box? If you grow it in a box, you can have any shape you like. You can have Mickey Mouse shape, Donald Duck shape, heart shape, any shape. But it's really about challenging orthodoxies. That's why when I work with a company, the first question I ask is, what if you challenge your assumptions? You know, if you think about it today, the world's largest taxi company owns no vehicles. The world's most popular media owner creates no content. Who creates all the content on Facebook? You do, right? The world's most powerful software company sells no software. You've never bought any software from Google, right? They give you the software, and then they sell your eyeballs to the advertisers. The world's most valuable retailer has no inventory. The world's largest accommodation provider owns no real estate, no hotels, nothing. So that's why Steve Jobs once said, don't be trapped by dogma, by orthodoxy, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. And if you reflect back on your life, I think you have to recognize that ever since you were a small child, people have been pumping their own thinking into your head. So when you're a child, it's your parents. And then you go to school, and it's your teacher. And then you go to university, and it's your professor. And then you join a company, and it's the company. And they're all giving you other people's thinking, right? They fill your head. And Steve Jobs said, no, don't accept that. Don't be trapped by that. You've got to think different. Think for yourself. And that's why when they launched the Apple Think Different campaign, they said, here's to the crazy ones. Because it's those who are crazy enough to think they can change the world who eventually do change the world. Here's a crazy guy in China. Zhang Hui. He's the CEO of Broad Sustainable Group. He looked at these skyscrapers in China, and he said, why does it take years to build a skyscraper? How long does it take to build a big skyscraper in Istanbul, normally? 2 years? This guy can build a 30-story skyscraper in 15 days. 15 days. If you don't believe me, go to YouTube, look at the video. 30-story building built in 15 days. You can watch the time lapse. You can see it being built. But also you can see it's a different kind of structure. It's interesting. Recently they put up a 57-floor building in 19 days. So how are they doing this? They're doing it through innovation. What they do, they prefabricate all of these big panels. And then they ship the panels to the building site. And inside the panel, they already have the electric cabling, all the water plumbing, and so on, and they connect it together like Lego. It's challenging orthodoxies. I remember this 5 or 6 years ago, I showed this thing, which was a concept at the time. Who says a bus has to look like a bus? This is a concept in China where the bus is on rails, and you may have seen this already on YouTube, and it runs above the traffic, because now they're introducing the first concepts of this. It's challenging orthodoxies. Who says a supermarket has to be a supermarket? What you're looking at here is not a supermarket. It is a subway station in Seoul, in South Korea. You've seen this, right? How many of you have seen this before? So what happens is you come down after work, you take out your smartphone, and you walk up to the interactive panels. This is the door of the subway train. So before you get in the train, you order your shopping. Milk, cheese, whatever it is you want. And it's easy to do. And when you get in the train then, they organize to have it delivered to your door by the time you get home. And so now, if you think about it, this app has had over 900,000 downloads in less than 1 year. It's by far the most popular shopping app in South Korea, and it's now the country's #1 online retailer. So here we have a concept in retail where you don't need any inventory. You go shopping without any shopping bags. All you need is your phone. It's brilliant. So what they're doing is now introducing this to bus stops and other places. Why do eyeglasses have to be so expensive? How many of you are wearing eyeglasses today, like me? How many are wearing eyeglasses? Come on, don't be embarrassed. I can see some of you. Don't put your hands up. You're wearing eyeglasses. Put your hands up. Why are they so expensive? You go to buy glasses. How much are glasses? When you buy glasses, how much do they cost? The average pair of eyeglasses costs around $263. That's over 900 Turkish lira for a pair of glasses, right? It's expensive. Why? It's because when you go to those stores, they're adding a margin of about 200 or 300% on top of the original price. So there's a company in the United States called Warby Parker, and they set up an online business. They're called the Netflix of prescription glasses. So what happens is you go online, the average price is $95. So let's say 300 Turkish lira instead of 900. So what happens is you go on, you look at the frames you like, you have this virtual mirror where you can try them on your face, which is really interesting. And then you order 5 frames to try at home. And they send you a box of 5 frames, and you choose the one you like best, and you send the rest back. It's beautiful. Now they have 1 or 2 stores as well, but interestingly, they were founded in 2009. So they're only 7 years old as a company. Yet they've already sold over 1 million pairs of eyeglasses, and they're valued now at over $1 billion because they're challenging orthodoxies. Why do diamonds have to be so expensive? Same question, right? So there's a guy, the reason is if you go to buy a diamond in Tiffany's, you have this really expensive store with all this expensive inventory in the glass cabinets. You have a very expensive salesperson that's been there for 25 years. You know, the actual real estate to be on Fifth Avenue or something is expensive. What this guy did, he started an online diamond company called BlueNile.com, and they sell diamonds for 40% cheaper than a regular store because he doesn't have the stores, the inventory, the salespeople. All of that stuff is cut out of the equation. Why do you have to wait so long for cement? I don't know if any of you are in that kind of building business. Anybody in building, construction, real estate, whatever? You know, normally if you order cement or concrete, it takes 24 hours to have it delivered. So there's a Mexican company called Cemex, and they went and looked at the emergency services in Houston, Texas. And they said, how can you get an ambulance to somebody in 3 minutes, yet it takes us 24 hours to get a cement mixer to somebody? And they found the answer was that in Houston, they were sending out the ambulances in the morning or across the city. And when someone calls up and says, I'm having a heart attack, they find the closest ambulance and they route it to your door. So they came back to Mexico City and they created a new logistics center. And now they send out the cement mixers in the morning across Mexico City. And when the contractor calls, says, I need cement, they look for the closest cement mixer and they just send that to the address. So now the average time of delivery is not 24 hours, it's 20 minutes. So this is innovation, not in the product. It's innovation around the product, in the service, delivery. Why do you have to wait so long for the doctor? You make an appointment at 8 o'clock in the morning. You're the first patient, right? What time do you get to see the doctor? If you're lucky. 9 o'clock, 9:30. So in America, they have a thing called Minute Clinic. You're sick, we're quick. You don't even need an appointment. They have these in all the Walmarts and shopping centers and so on. Dee Hock, the founder of Visa Card, once said, the problem is never how to get new, innovative thoughts into your mind. The problem is how to get the old ones out. It's the old thinking that blinds us to new opportunities. And so we find that we're chained. We're chained to these old ways of doing things. I mean, and it's interesting, if you look at an elephant, we don't often look at elephants, but if you do look at an elephant in a circus, it has a little chain on its leg. And you say, why doesn't the elephant just pull that chain out of the ground and walk away? The reason is because when the elephant was very small, little baby elephant, they chained it to the same post. And the elephant tried to get away, but they're pretty intelligent, elephants, so they think, that hurts. The more I do that, the more it hurts. So when the elephant is now fully grown, weighing several tons, they chain it to the same post. And it doesn't pull the chain out of the ground because it says, if I do that, it hurts. Elephants never forget. But where is the elephant actually chained? Where is it really chained? In the mind. And so are we. We are chained to these old legacy ways of doing things, and we never challenge them. That's why the biggest threat inside any industry is not the people that you normally compete with, it's the newcomers. Because the newcomers come into your industry without any preconceptions about how things are supposed to be done. The second lens is harnessing trends. It's about being able to see the future in the present. There's a wonderful quote from Emily Greenbaugh who said, "The future will be influenced by trends that are now existent and observable." In other words, everything you need to know about the future, you can know. Because you can see it now. You can see the trends. I mean, we talked about these trends earlier on. There's no secret here. Everybody knows what's happening. You can find out whatever you want. The question is, are we using those trends? Back in 1993, if you wanted to buy a book, you had to go to a bookstore. But it was Jeff Bezos who recognized the opportunity with e-commerce. He read an article, he was working on Wall Street, and he read an article that said, e-commerce is going to grow 3,000% in the next 2 years. So he saw the trend and he said, what can I do with that trend? And that was the birth of Amazon. And then he said, what's the next trend? And the next trend was, you can buy anything on the internet. So why can't Amazon become the Walmart of the web? And then he said, what's the next trend? And the trend was digital books. Downloading a file just as easy as you download a music file to iPod. Why can't you download a book file? So he creates the Kindle. And then he sees the success of the iPad, and he introduces the Kindle Fire tablet. And so now these things are so cheap, you can buy a Kindle Fire for $50. In fact, they're now offering them in 6-packs. Buy 5, get 1 free. It's amazing. And then we heard this story, of course, with the drones, with Amazon. A lot of people thought it was a publicity stunt, but it's true. This is the very latest version of Amazon Prime Air, and they're just trying to get around the FAA regulations in the United States, but in some countries they're already introducing this, like the United Kingdom. Then they see another trend in ride sharing, so they say we stop working with UPS, we start working with Uber and Lyft and Sidecar to deliver. Then they say, what's the next trend? The next trend is 3D printing. So what do? They open their own 3D printing store at Amazon.com, where you can buy all the printing machines, you can buy the plastic, you can also buy things that have been printed by other people. And the next trend, wearable computing, wearable technology. So they open a store on Amazon for wearable technology. Always the next trend. Streaming media, huge. What does Amazon do? They introduce Amazon Fire TV, Amazon Prime, with their own television programs on streaming. The next trend, Wi-Fi connected devices. So they introduced this thing called Amazon Dash. Anybody seen Amazon Dash? Have you seen Amazon Dash? So this is what you basically do. You put these things next to the place where you use the product. So in other words, if you're using Tide washing powder, you put this on the washing machine. And when you're using it, you say, oh, I'm running out of washing powder. So you press the button. It sends a signal to Amazon, and they automatically deliver Tide washing powder to your door. So now you can put these things all over the house, exactly where you need them. And all kinds of brands are using that opportunity to be automatically ordered. How many of you have seen Amazon Echo? How many do you have Amazon Echo? You have it at home? No, not yet. But so this is something you can talk to it. You can give it your shopping list. You can ask it to play music. There are all kinds of apps and stuff around it. It's like Siri plus a loudspeaker. You know, so it's this amazing thing. But the point is, it's kind of a Trojan horse. This is Amazon's entry into Internet of Things, controlling everything in your home. Again, retail trends, we see all this kind of stuff that's now possible with QR codes and so on. So some of you may have seen this new thing called Amazon Go. How many of you saw Amazon Go? So it's just been introduced, not quite open yet. It's going to be open early 2017. This is a physical store, a grocery store by Amazon, where basically you walk in the store and you just walk out without paying. Just walk out without paying. What happens is you scan your QR code on your phone as you walk in, and then when you take things from the shelves in the store, it automatically charges them to your account. And then you just take your stuff and you walk out of the store. So you don't have any line, you don't have any checkout, just easy, easy. Now, any supermarket on planet Earth could have done this. Yet it was only Amazon that took the opportunity to harness the trends. Here's another big trend. Who would have guessed in 1993 that this was going to change the world? Or 83, sorry. This was 1983, and this was 2003. Everyone with a smartphone. Of course, in 2007, we got this most powerful thing we ever seen in our lives, in our hand. What do we use it for? Some of us just use it for looking at pictures of cats on Facebook. But basically, it's a supercomputer in your hand. But it's about understanding where the trends are going and doing something about it. Back in 1995, this gentleman in China, Wang Chuangfu, who is the founder of BYD, said, if everyone's going to have a smartphone, every smartphone is going to need a rechargeable battery. So why don't we become the premium supplier of rechargeable batteries to the smartphone industry? 10 years later, he was the richest man in China. Because, 850 million people in China have a smartphone, or 3 or 4 smartphones. But then he said, what's the next trend? And in 2002, you could see with the success of the Toyota Prius that the next trend was electric cars. And what does every electric car need? A rechargeable battery. So he says, why don't we become the premium supplier of rechargeable batteries to the car industry? In 2008, they went one step further and said, let's make our own cars. Now, 8 years later, BYD is the world's largest manufacturer of electric vehicles. It's not Tesla, it's BYD. Not just cars, but buses and industrial vehicles. In 8 years, they went from nothing to being the world's largest manufacturer of electric vehicles. That's harnessing trends. I had a conversation back in 1993 with somebody from Philips in Holland. And he said, I don't believe in convergence. He said, I think if you put all these products together, you're going to create a Frankenstein monster. It'll be a jack of all trades and a master of none. It won't be a very good computer. It won't be a very good phone. It won't be a very good music player. It won't be a very good anything. It'll be a compromise. Well, how wrong could you be? How wrong could you be? And so we want to realize that today, as I said earlier, we have this amazing convergence of these technical trends. So social, mobile, analytics, cloud, robotics, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, they're all coming together. You can't stop that. It's going to happen anyway. And so that's why Larry Page of Google says, lots of companies don't succeed over time. What do they fundamentally do wrong? They usually miss the future. You want to make sure you don't get caught on the wrong side of the future. It's what happened to Blockbuster in the United States. Blockbuster was renting out DVDs. Netflix was renting out DVDs by mail. And then along comes the trend. And the trend is streaming media. And what are you going to do about it? So here's Netflix mailing out DVDs by post. They said, we're going to shift our business model. We're going to force our customers to go onto streaming media. And now they're one of the largest players in the world in streaming media. Where's Blockbuster? Finished, closed, bankrupt. In fact, I'm told by a reliable source that the last movie they ever rented out at Blockbuster was called This Is the End, which is rather appropriate. So it's seeing the future in the present, using the trends. One of the students in my innovation class some time ago is a man by the name of Paul Dillinger. He's now the head of global product innovation at Levi's. So they're like, how do we use wearable computing and combine that with our Levi's products? So one of the projects is a collaboration with Google to create a smart jacket. So this jacket is for commuters. And you wear this, for example, on your bike. You press it and your bike mode is on. Then you can have your favorite music playing. It gives you the directions of where you go, turn left, turn right. It tells you about other places that are around you, whether you want a pizza or something else. It tells you when there's a call coming in from the boss. And you can decide to dismiss the call if you don't want to talk to the boss. RFID, we know about RFID. It's a trend, technology trend for years. But what are we doing about it? We know it's been used in retail, in logistics and shipping. But what about more innovative uses of that technology, that trend? Like Philips created a smart pill, a smart tablet that you swallow in medicine. And it can give you real-time information about what is going on inside your stomach, the temperature, the acidity, all of those things. And it releases the medicine at exactly the right moment. Mini said, why don't we redefine RFID? Instead of calling it radio frequency ID, we'll call it really fun interactive devices. And they built an RFID chip into the car and the sensor into the advertising billboards in the city. So when you drive your Mini into the car, the billboard recognizes you and sends you a personal message. Hey, motor on, Jim. Or, hi, Kate, nice day for your convertible today. How cool is that? That is customer experience innovation, right? Using the technology to innovate and create a better customer experience. How many of you have been to Disney recently with the Magic Band? Anybody tried the Magic Band? Tried that thing? So, before you go, they find out who's coming and you get this Magic Band. It gives you the entrance to the park. You don't need a ticket. It gives you a quick pass to your favorite rides. It becomes your cash while you're in the park, so you don't need to have any money. You use it to pay for food, to pay for merchandise, T-shirts, toys, all that kind of thing. And also, it creates a better customer experience because they walk up to me on my birthday and they say, happy birthday, Rowan. How do they know? It's because I'm wearing the Magic Band. On the other side, think about all the data that this is generating for Disney. So they know who you are, when you came to the park, which rides you went on, where you ate, what you bought, how long you stayed. All of that data is being used by Disney. So they have this whole strategy around data with 4 pillars. Driving operational efficiency through data, transforming the customer experience, increasing the personalization, and also enhancing interactivity across channels. Look at this trend, augmented reality. How did Nintendo use this trend? So the Pokemon Go, sorry. How did Pokemon use this to create a massive success, at least for a time? Pokemon Go reached 50 million users in just 19 days. Unbelievable. Self-driving cars is a big trend, but also we have autonomous airplanes. Rolls-Royce has come up with a completely radical new answer, which is self-driving ships. Autonomous ships. Anybody seen this so far? So imagine the benefits where you don't have to have any crew. There's no captain, there's no bridge where you do all the controls, there's no sleeping quarters, there's no cafeteria, there's no nothing except space for more containers, which is good. The Internet of Things, of course, is connecting everything today, billions of devices, and we see this move towards the industrial internet. Industry 4.0 with the Internet of Things, intelligent machines, big data, analytics, all of that is coming together in very exciting new ways. And we see that particularly with GE, General Electric, where they're building all the sensors into their machines, into their factories. Look at this factory. Can you see any people? I can see just 2 people up there, right up here. That's because you don't need any people. In the whole factory, they have just 8 people and 1 iPad to run the whole place because everything is smart. So innovators are wave riders. Innovators welcome change rather than trying to resist it. They learn how to make change work for them rather than against them. And they've developed skills that enable them to turn discontinuity into opportunity. So my question for you is, are you up there riding these waves of change? These tsunamis of change? Or are you laying on the beach waiting for the tsunami to come up and hit you and wash you away? Now, tsunamis are very dangerous things, very destructive things. And I would argue that industry tsunamis are just as destructive. So the tsunami for Kodak was digital photography. The tsunami for the music industry was iTunes and Spotify and so on. The tsunami for the postal services was email and SMS and smart messaging and so on. The tsunami for Nokia and BlackBerry was the iPhone. The tsunami for the iPhone is Android. So the tsunami for the taxi industry was Uber. And the tsunami for the hotel industry is Airbnb. What you have to ask yourself when you look at these examples like this one, the electric car is a tsunami for the automotive industry, is what will be the tsunami in your industry? What's it going to be? In many cases, it's some form of digital transformation that is the tsunami. I like to say that every company should regularly ask itself, what will be the tsunami in our industry? How can we make sure we ride those waves instead of being washed away by them? We want to make sure that we spend less time looking inward at how great we are as a company and backward at how great we've always been. And we want to spend more time looking outward at what's changing in the world and forward at the evolution of our industry. We want to be able to get a grip on all of these trends and figure out how we can bring them into our business models. As you've done. Wonderful examples at Yappy Credit of using your mobile apps to create new value, award-winning stuff. I love the applications on the Apple Watch and the Samsung Gear, and also the use of the QR code for in online banking or at the ATMs. And then, of course, this facial recognition or eye recognition, biometrics. I saw this, by the way, recently in China, China Merchants Bank, same thing, they have facial recognition. But one thing they also now have is the ATMs with the facial recognition. Now, I appreciate that's quite a difficult thing to do here with thousands and thousands of ATMs, but you know, what's the next big thing? It's about embracing digital transformation in every possible way. How much is your industry going to change over the next decade? Are you going to be ready for those? Are you going to drive those changes? Which wave are you riding? You know, Steve Jobs once said, these waves, you can see them way before they happen, long time before they happen. And you just have to choose wisely which ones you're going to surf. The third lens of innovation is leveraging resources in new ways. Looking at your company and also the world outside like Lego that you can reconnect and use differently. For example, Disney. Disney has many core competencies and strategic assets, and they stretch them into new opportunities. Like, they'll take their competence in three-dimensional entertainment at the theme parks, they recombine it with their movies, and they create theater productions that tour around the world. Or Disney on Ice. Or they'll say, why don't you now have a cruise, a Disney cruise, based on the same skills of hospitality and entertainment. They also have a tour operating company where you can go and see Machu Picchu in Peru or the pyramids or whatever, but do that with Disney taking you there. One of the fastest growing business units at Disney is now a thing in China called Disney English. It's an English language school for children in China to learn English using the Disney characters and the Disney songs and the Disney storytelling. So again, you have to say, what do we have as skills and assets? How could we use them to stretch into new opportunities? Most companies don't do that. They define themselves by what they do. They say, we're a bank, or we're a car company, or we're whatever, rather than by what they know, which is their competencies, and what they own, which is their assets. So what I want you to do is ask yourself, what core competencies could we transfer to new opportunities? And could we exploit our strategic assets in new ways to bring new value to customers? Like Google. Google started as a search engine. What is Google now? Google is so many things. So many New opportunities from speech recognition, object recognition, self-driving cars, language translation. They're now moving into ride sharing with Waze. They're moving into hotel booking. They're moving into making their own microchips. And I don't know if you know this, but Larry Page has a secret, not so secret, company that he's founded under the Alphabet umbrella, the Google umbrella, to build flying cars. Did you know this? So based on drones. Larry Page says, I always thought it was kind of stupid if you have this big company and you can only do like 5 things. He said, I don't think we're going to run out of important things to do compared with the resources we have. So how do we do new things as a company? Look at Elon Musk. All the things he learned from SpaceX around aluminum, they've taken that now into the car business to make better and safer chassis. And then they take the car business and they say, what else can we do with this wonderful battery we have? And the answer is what they call the power wall, which is a battery on the wall where, whether you have it at home or in the office, you're storing energy. So instead of being connected to the electric grid, you're storing energy in the battery to run your appliances and your lighting and so on, especially in combination with Solar City. So you have your solar panels on the roof and your power wall on the wall, and you can go off-grid. Forget about paying electricity bills. You can also leverage other people's competencies and assets. When Apple came up with the iPod, they launched it in 12 months. How was that possible? Because they worked with other people. The people that designed the inside of the iPod was a company called Portal Player. And then they worked, of course, they had all these assets out there, existing music that they could tap into. When they came up with the iPhone, they worked with AT&T and Singular and Corning for the Gorilla Glass and Foxconn in China. They didn't do it all themselves. They partnered with these other companies. And if you think about the App Store, how many of those apps are actually made by Apple? How many apps on the App Store are made by Apple? Few? None. It's all externals. It's all third-party suppliers. Other people's skills, other people's assets on their platform. And so today, even if you look at Tesla, how did Tesla invent that fantastic 100-kilowatt battery for the car? Well, they partnered with Panasonic. They were actually using thousands and thousands of little Panasonic lithium-ion batteries. They didn't try and reinvent the battery. They used what was already out there. So today we have these new ecosystems, and we want to be able to tap into other people's skills, other people's assets, like the digital car. It used to be you had a traditional ecosystem in a car industry where you buy the wheels and you buy the windscreen and you buy, you know, the gearbox or whatever from other people. Today we have a new ecosystem, an ecosystem based on things like car automation, connected car, battery storage, GPS mapping, all of these new functions which require new partners. So you have to make the shift from the traditional value chain to this whole new value chain, all new kinds of partnerships. And everyone's looking at these partnerships, including Yappy Credit, right? How do you collaborate with new kinds of partners to offer these new things? BMW has done the same in connected mobility. They've partnered with Sixt Rent-A-Car in Germany to offer a service called Drive Now, which is like their version of Uber. They partnered with a company called Now Innovations for Park Now, which is a system that tells you where you can park. They partnered with a whole bunch of companies around charging stations for their electric cars. And they partner in China with Baidu to help them develop autonomous cars. The fourth and final lens of innovation is understanding unmet needs. Unmet needs of customers. How many of us needed any of these things? Well, we all needed them, right? Because now we can't live without them. But how many of us were asking for these things? Was anyone asking for Tesla or Starbucks or Facebook or Waze? No one was asking for these things. But obviously, we needed them. So how do we discover these needs before the competition? How much do you really know about your customers' unsolved problems, unmet needs and wants? How deep are you digging to find those things? When I say digging, I don't mean digging. I don't even mean digging. I mean digging really deep to find the things that everyone else has missed. For example, when I was in China years ago, I worked with a company called Haier. They make appliances, biggest in the world. And they went out to the country, the rural areas of China, to find out how people were using their products. And they discovered that out in the country, people were using their washing machines not just for washing clothes. They were using them to wash vegetables in the washing machine. Some people were using it to wash prawns in the washing machine. There were even other people that were making goat cheese in the spin dryer of the washing machine. So they said, what are we going to do? They came back, and instead of making a sticker to put on the front that says, warning, only used for intended purposes, do you know what they did? They modified the machine, and they produced a booklet to tell people how to wash clothes, wash the prawns, make wonderful goat cheese, and switch between functions for washing clothes. They worked from the need backward. Another need they found in the country that a lot of their appliances were being broken because the cables were being eaten by rodents, by mice and rats and so on. So they created this cable that the rats can't bite through anymore. And they put a special plate on the bottom of the appliance where these things can't get up inside the machine. It's understanding needs. Now, of course, they know the need is Internet of Things, connected living, so they come up with this whole range of products about inspired living. Understand the need, and then create the solution. Stop selling what you have. Start selling what they need. There was a wonderful ad from IBM that said, in fact, there was another one, was beautiful for a bank. It said, stop thinking like a bank. Start thinking like a customer. And that's the point. Think from the customer backward. This lady over in the United States discovered that 70% of American women wear a size 14 or larger, but they are left out of the majority of fashion sizing. So this reality is not 7%, it's 70% of women in America are a little oversized. They need bigger sizes. So she created a company called Eloquy, which is designed with fashion, particularly for those 70% of women in America. It's understand the need and design solutions from the customer backward. One of the ways you can do that is ask yourself, what's wrong with it? What's wrong with the current product? What's wrong with the current service? For example, what was wrong with these things? What's wrong with Coke, ice cream, chips, beer, coffee? Well, everyone loves these things, but you could say, well, I love the Coke and the ice cream and the chips and the beer, but they make me fat. Or you might say, I like drinking beer, but for religious reasons, I can't drink alcohol. Or I want to go out to a restaurant and drink a beer, but I want to drive home. So what would you need? Alcohol-free beer. Or you say, I love coffee, but maybe you have hypertension. And the more coffee you drink, the more you shake. That's why we got Diet Coke, low-fat ice cream, low-fat chips, light beer, alcohol-free beer, and decaffeinated coffee. We're just taking the negative out of the equation. We give you the same enjoyment, but without the negative. What was wrong with this thing? Absolutely dangerous. That's why they called it a cutthroat razor. That's why people used to have these really long beards. They were scared to death of shaving. And then we invented the safety razor, and the rest is history. What's wrong with these things? Have you ever struggled with a pair of scissors and a roll of tape? Where you put it in your mouth and how do you do it? Wouldn't you need this? Wouldn't that just be the most elegant solution? What was wrong with a thermostat? It's impossible to program it. Isn't it? Impossible. That's why we came up with Nest. Nest is this beautiful thermostat that's intuitive. It learns your behaviors and it programs itself. You don't need to touch it. What's wrong with a drill? You say nothing. You can't drill a hole in the wall without a drill. But what's wrong with it? Let me ask you, what's wrong with a power drill? What's the negatives? Cable. So we solved that. We put the battery in the drill. What else is wrong with the drill? Dust, what else? Noise, one of the noisiest things. Heavy, all that stuff. Let's go back to dust. One of the things that's been a great solution, I think, from Bosch is they've created an integrated vacuum cleaner. So now when you're drilling in the wall or in the ceiling, it's sucking up all the dust, and you don't have to worry anymore. What else is wrong with the drill? What if you're drilling in a very dark area, in the basement or behind a cupboard? What would you need on the front of the drill? A light. You see, when I ask you the questions, you use the lenses, you come up with the answers. What's wrong with it? Put it right from the perspective of the customer, right? What's wrong with an ambulance? Nothing. Unless you have a heart attack at 5 p.m. in the middle of a city like Istanbul. This is not Istanbul, of course, but it could be Istanbul. It looks the same to me. The ambulance can't get to you quick enough. So a group of students in Holland came up with this idea, which is a defibrillator in a drone. And it gets to you in 3 minutes. It has a camera so the doctor can see you. It has a loudspeaker so he can talk to somebody near you. And then you can put the electrodes on the chest and you can help save somebody's life. It's brilliant. What's wrong with paint cans? Everything. I can't think of one positive word to say about a paint can. You walk out of the store, the wire is cutting into your hand. You can't get the lid off. You have to use a screwdriver for the wrong purpose to get the lid off. The lid flips over here. All the paint goes everywhere. You try to pour with it, and it ends up looking like this. You can't get the lid back on again because now there's paint everywhere. So nobody had thought about reinventing the paint can until an American company called Dutch Boy said, let's make a new kind of package based on milk packaging. So they made it very simple. It's made of plastic. There's a handle on the side. There's a very simple screw top. You can pour it easily with this nozzle here. So it's been a wonderful invention. And just 6 months after they launched, the new package tripled their sales. It also tripled the number of retail outlets, the shops that were stocking the product. But look at that sentence here. It was the first new paint container in 100 years. Because no one was thinking about what was wrong with it. When I showed this to Heinz, they were laughing, they were falling on the floor. I said, I don't know why you guys are laughing. It took you 100 years to figure out that the bottle is the wrong way round. From the point of view of the customer. Even more powerful is when you say, what's wrong with it from the perspective of a particular customer group? Like, what's wrong with pizza? What's wrong with pizza? Nothing. Everybody loves pizza. You know what's wrong with pizza? You can't eat a pizza when you're driving a car. Can you? It's impossible to eat a pizza while you're driving a car. So these two guys in Italy came up with a new innovation. It's called the Cono pizza. The pizza in a cone. Now, by the way, we're in Turkey. Can you see an application of this in Turkey? Right? Not for pizza, but for pita and for döner and for all those things. So this is in a cone, so you can still eat it when you're driving or on the moped. It's now a franchise. You can find this in many countries, the Cono pizza. What's wrong with a gym? Nothing. Unless you are a woman. This couple in America found that women were intimidated in a gym. Why? Because there's all these sweaty men. And so she feels like, I need to be a supermodel coming in here, right? If I was a supermodel, I wouldn't be coming here in the first place. So they designed a gym exclusively for women. Which is like crazy on one hand, because you go, you're going to cut off 50% of your customer base. No men. But this is exclusively for women. You know this, it's called Curves. It's now the most successful fitness franchise on planet Earth. Exclusively for women. What's wrong with a thermometer? We want to take a temperature when the baby has a fever. What's wrong with a thermometer? I said, nothing. There's nothing wrong with a thermometer. Unless you are a baby. And you do not want anybody sticking that in your ear, in your mouth, under your arm, or somewhere even worse. So what is the solution? Isn't that the most beautiful thing you've ever seen? A pacifier with a built-in thermometer. And by the way, this is Fahrenheit, don't worry, it's not centigrade, right? But if you have a fever, it's going to change color. So when the baby is asleep, you can see if the baby has fever. It's beautiful. So where are the customer pain points? Where are the frustrations? What's wrong with it? How do we put it right? How do we become solutionaries? That's the 4 lenses of innovation. And again, if you use those things systematically, if you challenge orthodoxies, harness trends, leverage resources in new ways, understand and address needs, then you're on the road to great, new, innovative solutions. That's all the time I have. The rest is in the book, 4 lenses. I'm also available if you want to find me online to get my columns and stuff like that. I also founded a website 6 years ago. It's now the world's most popular innovation website, innovationexcellence.com, with 6,000 or 7,000 articles on innovation from all kinds of authors, 38,000 members on LinkedIn, and growing by hundreds every month. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Questions?
Yes, congratulations for performance.
Okay, thank you.
Evet, değerli konuklarımız, şimdi soru cevap ile devam edeceğiz. Daha sonrasında minik bir plaket töreniyle Akademi Zirvesi 2016'yı tamamlamış olacağız. Ama şimdi soru ve cevaplarınızı Sayın Gibson'a bekliyoruz. Soru sormak, buyurunuz.
Yes.
Mikrofon.
Thank you very much for this inspiring presentation, Rowan. My question would be on the human element. Whenever I try to do some innovation or disruption in the company, I see that whatever we are bringing in is going to obsolete other people, like we have to lay off people if we have artificial intelligence for our call center. How do you think we can deal with that? How do we use really the basic workforce when innovation comes into our companies?
Very good question. So clearly, innovation displaces some people, right? Particularly these new technological innovations. But there's a way perhaps for us to offset that displacement with the 3rd lens, which is leveraging resources in new ways. So if we can, for example, use our workforce to create new growth opportunities, we're going to need people to run those growth opportunities. So I think on the one hand we have this displacement through new things, and we have to introduce those things, otherwise we can't compete with the rest. But at the same time, we should be looking for new growth opportunities where we're adding business and we need new people to run those businesses. That's really the answer, is finding the balance between the two.
Peki. Buraya bir mikrofon lütfen.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Do you have kids?
I do, actually, 4, all boys.
Okay, how do you train them for the future?
Well, interestingly, when I was working on my first book in the mid-90s, one of the people that I spoke to was a gentleman by the name of John Nesbitt. You might remember the book Megatrends. And John was the author of Megatrends. And he said to me back in 1995, 96, he said, if I could give you one piece of advice, he said, if I were 23 years old, I would be in China and I'd be learning Mandarin. That's what you should do. So my oldest son, Henry, is 23 and he's in Taiwan at the moment learning Mandarin, doing exactly what we heard about 20 years ago. So how do we prepare our children for the future? I think one thing we have to understand is that, do you remember the surveys we looked at where they said in 3 years or 5 years, this industry will be unrecognizable and some of the biggest players will be gone? We have to understand that law or medicine, these areas now are going to be replaced by artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is going to be a much better lawyer than a lawyer. And artificial intelligence in many ways is going to give you a better diagnosis than a doctor. Because it can know everything and give you a diagnosis. IBM Watson can do this in seconds, right? They had one patient, nobody knew the problem. They key in the symptoms to IBM Watson, and in 2 seconds it comes up with the answer. These professions are going to change unrecognizably. You know, I even believe that in the near future we will have artificial intelligence helping us in government. Never maybe thought of that before, but imagine if you can compare all the economic answers and all sorts of other potential questions, and you can use artificial intelligence to help guide decisions in government. So these things are going to change irreversibly. And therefore we have to understand for our children's future to look for the opportunities where, you know, there's still some need for human beings.
But
and those are usually the creative industries.
But there should be some basic skills like technology, IT, engineers.
Absolutely. If you are the people that are making the software and driving the technology forward, you're in a good position to be able to help shape the future. But like I said, those old traditional professions and the old traditional industries, even manufacturing. Look at the displacement in manufacturing with robots. You know, so Industry 4.0, factory of the future, it's all about robots and digital and sensors. I showed you the thing from GE. It's an empty factory with 8 people in it. So we need, as societies, to learn to do new things. And that's either controlling and shaping the technology or doing creative things that maybe a computer can't quite yet do. You know? What else? Yeah, please.
Most of the industries are result-driven, and innovation creates uncertainty.
Did you say result-driven?
Yeah, result-driven or target-driven. But innovation means also uncertainty in terms of results and targets, and you have your capital to be allocated in the solid factors. So how do you convince CEOs or the business leaders to invest on the uncertainty?
Very good question. I think one thing we have to understand is what we looked at the first part of this presentation, is that if we're not innovating, we're not going to grow. If we're not innovating, we won't renew ourselves in the business model. So CEOs, I think I can say quite with certainty, understand the need for innovation, right? I mean, it's clear to everybody. The question you posed was, what about the uncertainty of innovation? So what we have to realize is that innovation doesn't normally run along a linear process, as let's say a new product development. We have to understand that sometimes innovation meanders like a river. I'll give you an example, and I talked about this before the speech. Airbnb. Do you know why Airbnb is called Airbnb? What's the air stand for? Their original concept was air mattresses. They wanted everyone to have an air mattress in their house and invite some stranger to sleep on the air mattress, and then I give you some breakfast and you go. Air, bed and breakfast, Airbnb. That was their original concept. So they started out and they weren't successful, but it grew and it changed and it grew and it changed. They asked for funding and they didn't get any. And then somebody said, I want to rent the whole apartment, or I want to rent the whole house. And they said, that is an interesting concept. And they introduced that and suddenly began to grow. So you have to give innovation some space to grow and meander. I mean, if I had asked you to invest in Tesla 8 years ago, you'd have said, no. Twitter. Even Twitter thought Twitter was stupid at first. They didn't think anybody would use it. So you have to allow for experimentation. I was very encouraged when I heard the phrase a failure budget. To have a failure budget. It's beautiful, because not really failure. It's trying something and learning something that you might be able to apply to other things in the future. But we cannot expect the same level of certainty from innovation that we get from the normal business case and the stage gate process and all that kind of thing. We have to create more flexibility for experimentation, to learn new things. Yes, sir. Some questions here?
Do you think is there a concept like sustainable disruptive innovation in an organization?
That's a very good question. I think innovation itself is becoming less, let me put it this way, innovations as competitive advantage are becoming less sustainable. So if you launch an iPhone in 2007, and by 2009 you find that you've got a Samsung that looks exactly like yours. And then before you know it, you have all these Chinese competitors. So that even a game-changing innovation like an iPhone or an iPad. Now we can get a $50 Kindle Fire. So that in itself is not sustainable. What is sustainable is your capability for innovation. So yes, it's possible to embed a capability for innovation inside a company that continuously produces new innovative products and services and business models.
Then do you think that continuous improvement is a base for disruptive innovation?
No.
Or they conflict?
Continuous improvement is only going to give you incremental innovation, usually. It's Kaizen, it's just little, like 10% better or 5% better. Radical is 10 times better. It's like the cement example we looked at. It's not like 23 hours instead of 24 hours, it's 20 minutes instead of 24 hours. That's radical innovation. So it's completely changing the way you do things, challenging orthodoxies, harnessing trends, and whatever else. But again, what is sustainable is building a capability inside a company, like quality, like supply chain management, like service, whatever, an all-the-time, everywhere capability for innovation where everyone at the company, and even people outside the company, customers and partners and universities and so on, are all involved in that sustainable innovation effort. You see the distinction I'm talking about? Beautiful. Any more?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for the presentation again. You are the most accurate person, I think, to answer the question, because you have traveled more than 60 countries in the world. What is the relationship between innovation and the profile of the country?
What of the country?
Profile of the country.
Profile of the
because most of the innovations are made in the developed countries. Why does a developing or third world countries cannot make innovations?
Well,
is it because of the Maslow's hierarchy?
No, I think that's a myth. If you measure, for example, if you look at the World Innovation Index, and you say, where's Turkey? You're going to see Turkey is down there, like somewhere. You go, why are we down there? We're a very innovative place. It's because that World Global Innovation Index, in my opinion, measures the wrong things. It's measuring the number of patents that are filed in the country. It's measuring the number of PhDs that are produced in the country. It's those kinds of technical, product-based innovations that are being measured. However, think about business model innovation. That doesn't even figure into the World Innovation Index. So if I live in Costa Rica. I live in Central America. It's a beautiful paradise. And I have a lot of work in Latin America. Supposed to be emerging economies. I've seen wonderful innovations, business model innovations, customer experience innovations in that region of the world, and yet they don't show up in the Global Innovation Index. And that's because, again, innovation is not just technology. It is not just products. Innovation is services. It's customer experience, cost structures, processes, business models. It's also the way you manage your company. You can innovate around the way you manage. The balanced scorecard was a management innovation, right? The 4 lenses is a kind of a management innovation because the way you approach innovation. So I don't buy that story about emerging economies. But I will say that culture makes a big difference. And what you have here in Turkey is a very dynamic culture. You have, again, this wonderful young generation that wants to do new things. If we can get enough education into the younger people, that's going to give them a good platform for innovating, particularly in other fields. But you have all the right ingredients right here in Turkey for a culture that can enable people to do new things. And I think the startup community and the entrepreneurship, those are great examples of that. I mean, I've seen that in places like Chile, startup Chile, wonderful. Colombia, I've spent a lot of time in Colombia. Huge amount of incubation and startups and so on going on. So, I don't buy that story about emerging economy.